Hello everybody and welcome to Langer's Legion. I'm Langer and let's talk Star Wars Legion. In today's video, I'm going to do a quick tier list rating each of the 10 battle forces that are now available in Star Wars Legion because AMG announced two new battle forces, the Wookie Defenders as well as the experimental droids back at Mini Stravaganza. And so I thought it might be a good time just to kind of take a look at where we stand currently. So let's get into it. So starting off about battle forces, right? So the very first battle force that came out really is around Shadow Collective, which is kind of, depending on who you talk to, is a faction, it's a battle force, but that was AMG's first foray into building battle forces. And that's something that they talked about in the Mini Stravaganza topic of battle forces, which I did a video on, I'll link over here. And that was something that they inherited in mid-flight from Fantasy Flight Games, no pun intended. But the key thing that they wanted to stress about battle forces is a good way to build thematic armies to relevant activities in the Star Wars universe, right? So you have Tempest Force and Bright Tree for the Battle of Endor. You have Blizzard Force and Echo-based Defenders for the Battle on Hoth, and so on and so forth. So they wanted to bring these thematic elements to the tabletop. But additionally, they also saw it as a new way or another way to play your existing minis that you might already own or that you might go out and purchase to give you new unit cards like HRUs and Blizzard Force, which is the heavy response unit stormtroopers, or even like we've seen in the experimental droids and the new Wookiee Battle Force, where they've come up with new cards for the Magna Guards as well as the Fluttercraft for the Wookiee. So it's just a good way to bring new mechanics and new ways to play this excellent game as opposed to just building quote unquote standard armies. So I thought what we'd do is do a quick tier list on how each of these 10 battle forces rank or stack up amongst each other. And I'm doing this more from the, let's call it competitive standpoint, right? So I'm not going to challenge whether or not if they're thematic or not, because I think all of them pretty much hit the mark there. But this is really about if you're going to build a battle force or build an army around these battle forces and take it to maybe your local shop or a tournament, how might you fare? So again, if you're doing these on your kitchen table to have a little fun, you know, these ratings would probably be a little different. Best way I thought about starting these is let's just go in order of how they were released. So let's maybe bring up the tier list here. And as you can see, I'm just using Tier Maker to kind of do the whole S, A, B, C, and D formula, which I'm sure folks are familiar with at this point in time. So let's start with Shadow Collective. Now, for Shadow Collective, I would rate this as an A tier battle force. Now, a couple months ago or almost a year ago, I mean, it was probably S tier, but based off some of the ones that have come out since then, it's kind of knocked it down a peg. But the fact that you've got a great force user in Maul, as well as you have the Black Suns, who can just kind of soak up all the suppression and it's really hit you really hard at range 2. This Shadow Collective is just a great battle force. And if you looked at, you know, if you follow the competitive scene or the tournament scene, you know, last year, the Pink Suns made it to the final round of Worlds and just really demonstrated how good Shadow Collective is or can be. There's some good pros there. And I would say the con to that, like I said, is it's probably not a straightforward list to play because you're using these suppression mechanics and leveraging the Black Suns and so on and so forth. But if you can get your handle on all that, I think you've got a great battle force to bring to the tabletop. Now, from there, we get to the kind of the first box sets or the only box sets besides Shadow Collective that you can go out and kind of buy for the battle force, which is the 501st, the Invasion Force for CIS, and then Blizzard Force for the Empire, as well as the Echo-based Defenders for the Rebels. So for these, we're going to go in order of those. So we're going to start with the 501st. Now, the 501st is definitely an S tier right now. You would, you know, probably say if you're looking at the competitive list, this is definitely the meta right now. You bring to the table Anakin with a bunch of, you know, with 4 special forces units with these range 5 Pierce and Sharpshooter, where you're just kind of like deathballing everybody around with these long ranges, and you're, you know, maybe you're using Anakin with Force Barrier to save off those wounds from them, or the other option is maybe you're equipping Anakin with Saber Throw, so you're going to get these, you know, fire support shots where you're going to be throwing loads of dice, you know, 12, 15 dice, depending on if you've suffered any wounds or not. as well as you're going to have Impact 3 and Pierce 3 in that regard. So it's just a really good list right now, and it's very strong. Not only do the units play really well with the ARC teams or the ARC troopers, but you've got really good command cards like Lead from the Front, where you're basically handing out aims or dodges to your units. Leaders of the 501st, which gives you your clone units Indomitable, so they're rolling red dice instead of white dice for rallying, which can be really powerful when you're trying to, kind of suppress them and lose some actions on them. A con to them, though, is, they are expensive. GAR is probably one of the most expensive armies in the game for troop count. So you're going to be looking at low activation armies. You're probably looking at 8 to 9 activations. And then when you throw those fire supports in there, you're even going to get less turns or less activations in a round, because you're basically doing a 2-for-1 when you're doing the fire support. Now, again, you're throwing those heavy dice, so maybe you're wiping your opponent's units off the board at the same time, but just be something to be aware of, is that you are going to be dealing with less activation, so you might be using the pass mechanic, within the game, just to kind of help things in your favor. You know what? Let's go with Echo-based defenders, right? This is probably, in my opinion, the weakest of the the 4 box sets that came out. And this is because, Rebels in general are just pretty squishy. And there's just not a lot of good units in this box. Now, I did a video on getting started in Legion, and like, do buy a core set or Battle Force box, link up here. One of the pros about Echo-based Defender is it is a great box to get into Legion. You get your best bang for your buck on minis and the units you get, but collectively put together in this Battle Force, probably not the best units to play with. I mean, you're dealing with Tauntauns and FDMs, which are great, but you only got Rebel veterans, you've got Han, you've got Commander Luke, and you've got Leia, which brings some decent stuff to the table. But all in all, you're playing at range. They don't really do anything good or great. And how I'm ranking these, somebody's got to be at the bottom. And I feel from a competitive perspective, Echo-based Defenders definitely brings up the rear. Now, for thematic, great, right? But that's not what we're rating here. We're actually rating how well you can compete with these units. So, unfortunately for me, I think the Echo-based Defenders fall to the bottom at the D tier. That brings us to the next Battle Force. Let's talk about Blizzard Force. Now, I think Blizzard Force is definitely one that is still S tier. It was definitely S tier when it came out. It's gone through some changes since it was released. If you're not familiar, the 2 big changes was originally you could take Operative Vader with this Battle Force, as opposed to taking, now you have to take Commander Vader. And then the price, or the cheapness really, of one of these HRUs, these heavy response unit stormtroopers, which basically lets you equip 2 heavies, and usually you're doing the RT-97C and the DLT-19 for those range 4 shots, were super cheap, like dirt cheap for what you were getting out of them. So AMG did recognize that. They did, like I said, make the change to Commander Vader. They increased the price of the HRUs, but this Battle Force, even with those changes, is still S tier, very dominating, I think, in a competitive scene, because with those changes, as well as, but the main thing is you still can bring those 4 bikes to the tabletop, which, if you're controlling the battle deck, if you're doing breakthrough or bombing run, having 4 bikes on the table, or 4 sets of bikes, is just something your competition or your competitors always got to think about, because of their speed and how fast they are and how they can flank. And they do throw pretty good attack dice. You're throwing a double rainbow with a full squad, and you bring Impact 2, so they can do some damage. Again, they're squishy. They roll white dice. But if you can hit them before they hit you, it might not matter. But definitely an S tier, great command cards. You don't even have to, sometimes I think maybe the best list isn't even a Vader list. I play Blizzard Force with a Veers list based around Veers, ATST, and the 4 bikes. So bring that armor, because, ATST's got that shock value when you put it on the table. It causes that worriness from folks. So a great Battle Force, definitely S tier, a couple different ways to play it. Following up with that, let's talk about the Separatist Invasion, but I'm definitely putting this one in D tier, because it's not really any different than a regular CIS list from, being thematic for what you can bring to the table. Meaning it's the best thing about it is you can take up to 8 core units. So if you want to flood your opponent with, B1s, with just minis all over the table, that's great. But I mean, they're B1s. They throw white dice. They're very squishy. You can take them off the table pretty quickly. So, I mean, you're really limiting yourself. There's no Magna Guards. You get no Force users or any of that type of stuff. So the Invasion Force for me, again, competitively speaking, not that great. It does have some decent command cards, but I don't think that's enough to offset kind of the limitation of droids and being this. The one special thing about this is you can load up the table with B1s. So still a D tier for me. The Imperial Remnant kind of came out during the, let's call it the Mandalorian releases, where we got Din Djarin, we got Moff Gideon, we got the Dark Troopers. So that's where this battle force came from, right? So this is the post Return of the Jedi, the Empire spread across the galaxy, and you're just scraping things together. This is a really good battle force, and the reason for that, in my mind, is a couple reasons. One is, I mean, you can take Dark Troopers. Dark Troopers are really good. I don't think I need to explain that to anybody. Not only that, you can take 2 of them. I don't know if you can fit 3 in there anymore because Dark Troopers did get a price change. But even having 2 sets of Dark Troopers on the tabletop is enough to worry about. It's got some really cool mechanics on this. Since it is the Imperial Remnant, you're allowed to mix and match your unit types, meaning if you can use heavies from the Stormtroopers or the Shore Troopers across different unit types. So I could put the T-21B from the Shore Trooper in my Scout Troopers as the heavy, and so on and so forth, right? Because again, remember, this is the idea of they're just scraping together whatever they can. The other thing on this is Death Troopers and Scout Troopers actually count as core for the sake of list building. So again, they're giving you these ways of using existing units that you might already have to play them in a different way. And again, with that mix and match of heavy units, that just makes things really great. Moff Gideon, I mean, if you can play Moff as your commander. Most of the time I've seen this is with Ruthies, the Imperial officer, but Moff Gideon is an option. And if you definitely want, to play with the Darksaber, you can throw that in there. What's unique about this is there's no dedicated command cards. So these previous battle forces we talked about, at least the box sets all have their own command cards. This one does not come with any. So based off of what commander you bring or the standard cards, that's what you're going to be limited to. But the mechanic that's very interesting, this is you've got a restricted command distance. So commanders can only give up to range 2. And if you're outside of that range 2 for your units, they get independent aim or dodge, right? So the key with these is, for these units, is potentially not to be within range of your commander, but to use that independent to give out those aims and those dodges to these units. So a different way to play these. I've ran up across this a few times. Definitely strong, definitely worthy, I think, of an A tier listing. Let's go with Ewoks and the Bright Tree. Probably most folks are aware this year was the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. AMG celebrated that by releasing the long-awaited Murder Bears to the game as far as units are concerned. And then they came out with this Bright Tree Village battle force. And I put it at C tier because I haven't seen a lot of it. I'm putting together my own Bright Tree. So I haven't played it yet, but I've watched some games of it. I'm trying to figure it out. And I just, again, based off what is in this list, I can't see it going above C yet unless somebody comes up with a really good, let's call it Bright Tree meta list. But the pros about them, Murder Bears, who doesn't love Murder Bears? It's definitely a list where you get lots of activations. The Ewoks are cheap. You get a lot of minis. So, standard squad is 6 units. And I'm talking about getting up to 11 activations, even if you go with the Chewie version of the ATST. If you sidestep that, 12, 13 is easily obtainable depending on what upgrades and whatnot you add to them. So you can definitely put a lot of minis on the table, which will be somewhat of a con here in a moment, but you can definitely field a big army where your opponent can feel probably overwhelmed by what you've put on the table. And then talking about Chewie, him and the ATST with that incognito, I think kind of maybe the best way to play them, or how I'm planning on playing them, is, he's got incognito, nobody can shoot him. The ATST's line of sight blocking, so maybe you do those like conga line of your Ewoks behind them, again, depending on the battle deck and what you're playing, to kind of save them up, because the Ewoks are squishy. They save with whites. They don't have a very far attack range. Most of their weapons are range 2, if not in melee, for like the skirmishers. So you're definitely going to have to get close to your enemy. And that's where that drawback is of having a lot of minis, is the fact that you are going to be losing them because you got 6 minis in a squad. You're going to kind of pop them off your enemies. So they're going to dilute them down before you potentially get up and into their army to attack them. So I think they're going to be very objective focused, because you're not going to have that kind of firepower to table somebody. They lack a lot of crits or way to generate crits, so you don't have like a lot of impact, minus some of their command cards. So they could be a potential challenge to anything with armor. You think about those double darks I was talking about, or something with an ATST. You could run into some challenges for sure. But along with, the Return of Jedi for the 40th anniversary with the Ewoks, we got Tempest Force, which was the force that the Ewoks, at least in the movies, defeated in the movie. And that's, I rate them as a B tier. I don't think they're the top, in the S or the 8s. I've played Tempest Force. They're a lot of fun, but they're definitely without their challenges. But I mean, B tier, it is Empire. You can take up to 3 ATSTs with this list if you want. So you can put 3 ATSTs on the table. Major Marquand is the commander, and he gets vehicle direct. So you're using one of the ATSTs as your actual commander. So that can be very unnerving maybe to your opponent when you put 3 ATSTs on the table. But I can also tell you, as somebody's played it, it's also hard to navigate and move 3 TSTs on the table, because you don't want to like move through your units or step on them, or that type of stuff. It does have above average command cards. So Blizzard Force does have some print to play command cards, which are pretty cool. They fit well, dovetail well with the vehicle play of Tempest Force. And the Battle Force itself has some pretty interesting mechanics. All the vehicles get Scout 2. So you get Scout 2 with those ATSTs, and think about those bases on those guys. I mean, those things are pretty big, so you can move up pretty quick. Or if you go with the bike list, now granted, not like Blizzard Force, you can only take 3 bikes as standard, but you get Scout 2, right off the rip with your bike. So if you really want to, again, if you're doing bombing runs, you could really force the issue very quick. And you also get this kind of rapid reinforcement light mechanic where you can set aside 1 special forces or 1 core unit like you would in the regular battle deck rapid reinforcements, and then, drop that unit anywhere on the tabletop within range, outside of range 2 of your opponent, which is pretty interesting. So if you actually flop to rapid reinforcements, you could do that with 3 units, right? And you could potentially, depending on what game you're playing, if you're doing VAPs or something like that, you could put them in some very good key positions. The drawback here is, I think this list can be pretty squishy. I have played it a couple times. I've had run into scenarios where even though the ATSTs look very threatening, they are armored, but they do roll white defense dice. So I've had an ATST melted in 1 round with somebody with Magna Guards with that RPS, and they were just loading me up. So white saves, armor's great, but white saves, not so good. So you can melt this down, and you're limited in your units. You basically have stormtroopers and you've got scout troopers. With scout troopers, you can take up to 6 in this list. You can't take strike teams. And the scout troopers are decent, but they're only range 2 for their attack, and they have low profile, so they help with that, but they roll white defense dice as well. So you can get into some trouble there as far as if you're playing objective-based games where you need, trooper units to pick things up. Think Recover the Supplies or VAPs or something like that. Because if you're doing a vehicle heavy list, you're not going to be able to handle those objectives. So that could be a potential problem with Tempest Force, but still a decent battle force. And that leads us to the most recent announcements of the Wookie Defenders along with experimental droids. So let's start with the Wookiees. I think everybody was hoping for this, and AMG didn't disappoint when this was announced. I think the Wookiees still don't crack that A or S tier. I think they're in the B tier. And I just don't think they pack enough oomph, right? They're going to be very objective focused or game mechanic focused or table like there's going to be very specific things that are coming to play on how you're going to succeed with these guys. Now, I know somebody at Crucible played Wookiees and they did very well with them. So others could argue with me, maybe you rank these a little higher. But I think time will tell on these. Now, the pro with these obviously is they're Wookiees, right? You get a lot of Wookiees on the table. You can mix and match some of the clone units into this if you want, but I don't feel like that's how folks want to play this Battle Force. You want to get all the Wookiees on the table that you can. And then you pair those with Chewbacca and Yoda, and you can get into some crazy shenanigans with guidance. There's a special Fluttercraft build that's a printer play card that they announced with this, where the Fluttercraft gets some cool overrun and bombing run type maneuvers where you can slow itself down or it speed itself up for its activation. So there's some cool mechanics there. As well as with the Wookiees themselves, you're probably going to take the Noble Defenders, which is our very melee focused, Wookiee unit. And as each time you lose a Wookiee in the round, or once a round, I should say, you get a speed 1 move. Now, granted, you don't want to lose that many Wookiees in these units because they're not very big as it is, and based off points, you're probably not going to be able to add a lot of upgrades to them. So you start off with 3, you lose, let's say round 2, you lose 1, then you get to do a speed 1 move with the remaining 2, right? So you're going to want to, hit the W key, as folks like to say. You're going to want to move these forward to get into melee. And this is just another great way to do it, or play to that with this mechanic of if you lose 1, you can move 1 forward. Now, same as GAR or the 501st, you are going to be very limited on activations. Wookiees are expensive. I think Yoda is the expensive, if not one of the most expensive, units in the game if you kit him out. And I feel like Yoda's going to be pretty much a stapled unit to this, to the Wookie Defenders. You're going to be dealing with low activations, probably around, again, the 8 to 9, just like the 501st. So you're going to need some command play to know how to best position those units, know when to dive in, when to hold things, when to pass. For a competitive person, maybe not that big of a deal, but if you're just learning them, there might be a learning curve there. And again, I focused on melee. Like, you're not going to get a lot of ranged attacks out of these guys. So again, you're going to be hitting that W key. You're going to be moving forward, and you're going to want to get into that base melee contact with these guys. And then last but not least, we get the experimental droids. And with these guys, I feel like this is a cop-out, but I put them in the B tier as well. And the reason for that is, I don't think there's enough there as of yet that I've seen. I haven't seen anybody play this. I've only done some stuff on tabletop, like, list crafting to kind of figure out how I do these to, again, take you up to that A or the S tier. It doesn't mean it doesn't come, but right now I don't see it. But the cool thing about this list is, these guys get a token share like clones, right? The mechanic for this battle force is your commander. So let's say you take a super tac droid. At the beginning of the round, he gets 3 surge tokens that you're going to put on his unit card. And it's a very key distinction. You're putting that on his unit card. And then any units with the AI keyword that are range 3 of them can actually, during their activation, spend one of those tokens to do one of 4 things. They can increase their speed by 1. They can add a black and a white dice to their attack pool. They can take 1 aim or 1 dodge, or they can remove 2 suppression tokens. Or they don't have to do anything, right? Like maybe you don't take them at all, which is a key thing of why I'm saying those tokens are on the unit card. So if you round 1, you put 3 tokens on there and you don't use them, they stay there. You go to round 2, you put 3 more down, right? So now you've got 6. This isn't like the token cleanup that you do at the end of the round from ones that are on the tabletop, because these aren't on the table. So you're not handing them out to units specifically. You're holding them like, prepared supplies where you've got that dodge until you want to use it. So I think that's a really interesting thing that can definitely elevate these guys higher up, depending on how that is used and how that is played. There are some new units as well. So just like with the Wookiees where they did some upgrades to the Fluttercraft, they did make some new Magna Guards as well as the new tank. I'm not super excited about these. I think, they reduced the points of the Magna Guards, and they increased the number of units from 3 to 4, but they took off like Retinue and they took off Guardian. but then again, you get these surge tokens that you can borrow from the commander. So I just don't know enough about to see how that mechanic's going to work. So with that, I did just put them in the B tier for now, but I think it's pretty cool that now we're going to have something that's kind of Gar-like, where you're going to have this token sharing across your units. You're just going to be taking them from your unit commands. So that gives me the kind of the tier list of the 10 available battle forces as of now. But, you know, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think something should be higher? Something should be lower? Share your comments and your thoughts down below. But until the next video, hail to the Empire.